Are you feeling a little bit behind relative to your retirement plans? Well, you are not alone. In fact, over 57% of Americans today are feeling behind relative to their goals for retirement. So in this episode, we are going to talk about 6 ways that you can improve your potential outcomes for your successful retirement. My name is Kevin Lau. I am your host of the Planning for Retirement podcast, and I'm also the owner and lead financial planner at Imagine Financial Security. We help individuals over 50 that have at least $1 million saved, maximize their retirement spending, minimize their lifetime tax bill, and worry less about the financial markets. If that describes you, of course, make sure to follow our podcast and also make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We put out weekly retirement-related content specifically designed for you, PFR Nation. And PFR Nation, hello, welcome to the new office, the new digs here. It is official. We moved in on Friday. I'm recording this on Monday, by the way, so it's a little bit of a rush to get this out on time. I don't know if it's going to come out on Tuesday this week, so if it's a little delayed, I apologize on that one. I had every intention to record last Thursday, but it was the day before our official move date, and it's just chaos. I mean, the amount of effort and work it takes to move a family, or at least my family, with a lot of things and 3 boys and 2 dogs. It's a little bit mind-blowing, okay? Like, we're still moving things out of the house. We need to go back today to our old house, our rental, and just get a few things. Actually, one thing we need to get is the TV off the mantle. So we've not had any TV in the house the last few days, which has kind of been nice, but also driving my wife and I a little crazy because we're trying to unpack with 3 boys, that are very curious and very, active. So boxes everywhere. It's a little stressful right now, not going to lie. In fact, as you can look, the backdrop right now looks a little similar to my home office from a couple of years ago. If you remember, for those of you that have been following me for a while, my old bookcase is now in the new office here in the house, but I am working on cardboard boxes. Okay. My desk did not fit through the hallway and the trim in the door. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to disassemble this bad boy, which I remember assembling this thing with my dad a few years ago when I first launched the business. So that was 2020. Oh my goodness. This thing was insane to assemble. So trying to disassemble to take off the top. Not sure if it's going to be worth it to try to get that desk in here. I might have to sell that thing. And truthfully, I kind of wanted to get one of those kind of the standing sitting desk combinations. So I might unfortunately have to sell that desk. Sorry, Dad. I know we worked hard on that a few years ago, but I might have to sell that guy and get a new desk. But thanks to my wife for the cool little backdrop. I was literally going to record today with a blank wall. She was like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm sitting on a chair that I found in my garage. I have cardboard boxes as my desk right now. So my setup is actually pretty low rent right now, but the backdrop makes it look very high class. So if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Spotify, that's what that looks like. And also my 3 boys are home for summer. They've got some camp starting here, but I think they've got a couple of weeks where they have nothing going on. So perfect timing, moving into a new house when we have 3 boys home. So anyways, they're outside of the door. They're trying to get in. I locked the door. I said, stay out. Daddy's got to record. But you may hear them in the background as well as my 2 dogs. So anyways, life is chaotic right now, but I'm excited for this one because I feel like we've been doing not a lot of episodes, but definitely we've been doing a few episodes for folks that have almost oversaved for retirement. And truthfully, a lot of our clients are in that scenario, but we also have folks that we're talking to that are in their 50s or early 60s. They haven't yet retired and they're feeling like they're not on track. And truthfully, once we go through the math with a lot of those individuals, they kind of realize, hey, they're actually better off than they thought. That's one of the dilemmas I feel like we live in right now with modern technology, with social media, with 24/7 news cycles, is that people kind of feel worse about their situation than it actually is. I see this all the time. Like, clients will reach out, or prospective clients will reach out. Kevin, I have $2 million saved and we're spending $100,000 a year. We're stressing out. We don't know if we have enough saved. Of course, there are always unknowns relative to retirement. How long are you going to live? What are the markets going to do? What is inflation going to do? Are you going to have a long-term care need in retirement? So there's always the unknowns in the future. But if you just kind of look at the pure math and say, hey, let's assume some historical averages, let's assume a reasonable rate of inflation, a lot of those folks, hey, we're in pretty good shape. $100,000 relative to a $2 million portfolio, that's about a 5%. Again, ignoring taxes and anything like that, that's about a 5% rate of withdrawal, pretty in line with where you want to be. So my point in saying this is you may be on track, you may not be on track. I think that's kind of the first part is you need to sort of get a little bit of a stress test to say, hey, am I on track for what we're trying to accomplish? And if I am, great. Do I retire early? Do I spend more? Do I give more? And we talked about some of those things, but we haven't really addressed, hey, what if you're not on track? Like, what are some of those things that you can control? And that's important to note as well is there are things that you can control and there are things that you cannot control. And I like to focus on things we can control. Okay. And so we're going to talk about 6 things, 6 strategies, tactics, whatever you want to call them, strategies. Let's use 6 strategies that you can put in place in no specific order. We're going to just talk about 6 things that you can put in place that we've helped our clients with in the past and to help improve their probability of success, improve their outcomes, give them greater peace of mind, give them greater confidence as they approach this next chapter. Because it is scary. I'm not going to lie. I mean, listen, I'm not in the boat of, hey, I'm transitioning into not earning income anymore. So you're going from active income to passive income. That could be a little scary for most people. And oftentimes it's the fear of spending down the portfolio and worrying about that long-term care event down the road. And ultimately they kind of sacrifice, a lot of folks tend to sacrifice those early years of retirement, what I like to call the go-go years, which is when you're healthy and you're able to do physically the things that you may want to do, traveling the world or spending precious time with your grandkids, whatever that might be. Okay. So anyways, so we're going to talk about 6 things. There's also some bonus little tactical things that I'll talk about as well. And it should be a good episode here. But like I said, I'm a little out of my element. I was going to go into the office to record today, but it's just we have 10,000 things to do right now in the house, including, like I said, going back to the rental so I can get my TV out and just do a couple of things there. But anyways, we're going to make do. Let me take a little sip of the coffee here. I'm going to need this one, which is why, by the way, this mug, New Hampshire, as you can see this one. Best motto out of any state, in my opinion, live free or die. I mean, honestly, it makes me want to live in New Hampshire. Actually, not really, but we visited there a few years ago. I think it was actually 2020. It was during the pandemic. We did a little road trip up in New England. I've talked about this road trip before because one of my buddies lives up in Connecticut and we had that Florida license plate. He did not want any of his neighbors to see he had a visitor from Florida during the pandemic. So he had me back into his driveway to hide the license plate. Well, in that same trip, we stayed in Lincoln, New Hampshire, and did some hiking and things of that nature in the mountains there. It is a beautiful, beautiful state. So hats off to New Hampshire for the best motto in the country, in my humble opinion. All right, we're going to ram through these. Okay, so number 1, I feel like this is probably where most people go to start with. Okay, let's say we're walking through a financial plan for retirement. You know, we stress tested initially, run the Monte Carlo. And for those of you that don't know what the Monte Carlo is, it's essentially, sometimes it's 500, but oftentimes it's 1,000 hypothetical returns relative to the markets. And sometimes there are some other variables that you can build into there as well, like inflation, et cetera. And certainly you can stress test those later, but kind of the baseline is we don't know what the returns are going to be in the future. And that makes a big impact long-term relative to your success or failure in retirement. If you assume a 9% rate of return, a lot of your plans are probably looking pretty great. Okay. But 9% rate of return, that's going to involve taking a substantial amount of risk in your investment portfolio for 25, 30 plus years when you're not working anymore. Oftentimes we see that's a little uneasy for some individuals. Okay. Especially as they get older, they're not earning any active income. They're going to passive income, or they just simply get older and they're worried about, hey, my health is deteriorating, and they get a little bit more conservative over time, which is okay. And I do talk to folks about getting too conservative too early. That is absolutely a risk. And we're going to talk about a little teaser. That's going to be one of the 6 we talk about. But I think where most people go at the very beginning, if they're not on track, is to save more and invest more, which not a bad place to be. Okay? I'm not saying don't do that. Okay, but increase savings rate. And if you're over 50, which most of you are in that over 50, a lot of you are in over 60 as well. But if you're over 50, there's catch-up retirement plan contributions with the 401k plans as well as individual retirement accounts. And once you hit 55, there's a catch-up for HSAs, health savings accounts, one of my favorite buckets for retirement. We've got a super catch-up if you're turning 60 or between 60 and 63. Don't ask me who makes these rules. I don't understand what they're doing in Congress. They're like, hey, let's make up these ages. And hey, instead of this catch-up, we're going to do that. I don't know what they're doing. They like to confuse people. Okay. Maybe that gives me job security. I don't know. But anyways, increase your savings rate. I mean, let's start with the 401k plan. So if you're over 50, you can contribute in 2025, $31,000 into a 401k plan for the employee contributions. Okay. That's important to note is I have seen people make that mistake before. They're like, hey, I'm putting in 20 and my employer matches me 11. So therefore I'm maxing my 401k. That's actually not true. 31,000 is only related to the employee contributions. Okay. So employer contributions are on top of that. And actually the total amount you can get in to one of these defined contribution plans is $77,500 for 2025, including the catch-up contribution. So it's $70,000 excluding the catch-up. So if you're under 50, it's $70,000 total contributions, and then an extra $7,500 for that catch-up if you're over the age of 50. Okay, so that applies to 401ks, it applies to 403bs, it applies to thrift savings plan if you're in the federal government, it applies to 457 plans if you have one of those available as well. And then there's an IRA catch-up. So an individual retirement plan account or individual retirement account has a maximum contribution of $7,000 per year, whether it's a traditional or Roth. It's a total contribution limit amount. So if you put $3,500 into a traditional IRA, you can only do $500 into a Roth IRA. Okay. Now, if you can fund a Roth IRA directly versus a traditional IRA, the deductibility and when you want to take that deduction, if ever, is going to play a factor in whether you do after-tax or post-tax contributions. But we've done episodes in the past around, pre-tax now, pre-tax or tax-free later versus tax-deferred. But anyways, real simplistic. If you're over 50, you get an extra $1,000 catch-up. Okay, so you're really going to move the needle a lot. So really the 401k plan obviously gives you more contribution amounts. So kind of the order of operation, try to max that out. If you're not maxing it out, at least try to get up to that employer match. I mean, if your employer is giving you a 5% match, you need to at least do 5%. Okay, whatever your salary might be. If it's $100,000, that's $5,000 a year. If it's $200,000, that's $10,000 a year. And then they're going to give you free money on top of that. So it's a guaranteed 100% rate of return, which I would recommend you taking advantage of. But the 401k plans allow those higher contribution limits if you're over 50. Now, the super catch-up, I did a whiteboard fireside chat on this. The super catch-up contribution, real simply put, Secure Act 2.0, piece of legislation that was passed a couple of years ago. Some of these rules are now coming into effect, one of them in 2025 being this super catch-up contribution. So instead of the $7,500 extra that you can put into these plans, you can put in $11,250, okay, if you've turned 60, 61, 62, or 63 in 2025. So you get a little extra, okay? Not a ton. I guess what is that? $3,750. So $3,750 additional contribution amount on instead of the $7,500 regular catch up if you're just over 50. But then once you turn 64 or 65, that's not available. So again, I don't understand who made those rules. Why don't you just say a 60 plus catch up, super catch up? That would make more sense versus 60 to 63. Because I have a couple of clients that are turning 64 this year. The first year it's available. They can't do the super catch up. So anyways, it is what it is. We talked about employee contributions. Employer contributions are separate, but for that total max limit of $77,500. This is where a lot of employers today are adopting in their 401k plans what's called the mega after-tax contribution. Okay, so or Roth contribution. So essentially, this involves an additional contribution into the 401k. Again, let's say you're putting in the max employee contribution of $31,000. Let's say your employer matches you, I don't know, $10,000. So now you're up to $41,000. Well, you can put in up to $77,500 total, all of the sources combined, employee and employer, into a defined contribution plan. So technically speaking, you could put in, what is that, an extra roughly $36,000 and some change, $36,500 that you can put in to these 401k plans. Now, a lot of the 401k plans that allow for the mega after tax don't just say, you can just put in the extra 36.5. There's some top heavy testing. There's a lot of bureaucracy, government bureaucracy involved with making the calculation, but the plan administrator will calculate what the max after tax contribution amount will be. So they'll typically just quote that amount in the annual benefits booklet. So, I was looking at one, it says $20,000 extra contribution into the after tax source. So what you could then do is make a $20,000 after-tax contribution, which typically those contributions will grow tax deferred. So you didn't get a tax deduction like a regular 401k plan. So regular 401k, pre-tax contribution reduces your taxable income, and then everything grows tax deferred. Whereas the mega after-tax, you actually are just making an after-tax contribution. So getting no deduction, kind of like the Roth, but the difference is because it's an after-tax contribution and not a Roth contribution, the money is going to grow tax deferred. So no deduction on front, the money grows tax deferred. So really what you want to do if you're making those sources of contributions is you want to automatically or manually convert that after-tax contribution over into Roth. Now, there are steps that are typically outlined if the plan allows for this mega after-tax contribution into the Roth. But oftentimes what I see nowadays is there's an auto conversion inside of the 401k plan. So you don't even have to do anything. You just say, okay, an additional after tax into the Roth of 20,000, I'll make that $20,000 contribution after tax, no deduction, but also no taxable income phase out, no MAGI phase outs for Roth IRAs. So Roth IRAs have income phase outs once you hit certain thresholds, and the thresholds are fairly low. For a lot of you listen to PFR Nation, you may not be able to contribute to a Roth IRA, whereas the 401k plan, there are no modified adjusted gross income phase out. So you can make that after tax contribution and then auto convert it into the Roth. And then now you have more money into the Roth account. So adding up all those sources, you can technically get up to $77,500 in a year all into the 401k plan. And if you're self-employed, the same number applies. Whether you have a solo 401k or a SEP IRA, if you have one of those plans, that $77,500 limit also applies too. So very powerful. If you've got a 401k plan and you're like, hey, I need to aggressively save more, that could be a good opportunity. Depending how many years you have to save, that is going to drive how much of an impact that has. If you have one more year to work, may not make a huge difference. But if you've got 3 or 4 more years, adding an additional 70 grand plus into a retirement account or multiple retirement accounts absolutely could move the needle. So definitely look at that. We hit on the Roth IRA, traditional IRA, like I mentioned, lower contribution limits, but that could be an additional, going back to the order of operation, that could be an additional source of funding contributions over and above that 401k max. So you can hit that 401k max, then do the IRA. And if you're phased out of the Roth, you can do a backdoor Roth IRA contributions. Same mechanics that we just talked about with the mega after-tax 401k applies to the Roth IRA. So make an after-tax contribution non-deductible to an IRA and then convert that over to Roth. Now you have tax-free growth versus tax-deferred growth. And there's no modified adjusted gross income limit phase-outs. The thing you need to watch out for, though, is the pro rata rule. So if you have a traditional IRA, it may not be a good strategy for you to do the after-tax backdoor Roth contribution into an IRA. You may want to focus that in the 401k plan. I mentioned HSAs, my favorite investment account for retirement, because you get the trifecta tax benefit. You got pre-tax contribution, so fully deductible, regardless of your modified adjusted gross income, tax deferred, or you could call it tax-free growth in this case. So tax-free growth and tax-free distributions, as long as those distributions are being used for qualified medical expenses. So very, very powerful. And once you turn 55, not to be confused with 50 related to the 401ks and IRA catch-up, the 55 is when the catch-up becomes available in the HSAs, and they give you an extra 1,000. So for individual plans, if you're on an individual health insurance plan through your employer, you can put in 4,300 plus the 1,000. So that's 5,300. If you're on a family plan, if you have multiple people covered within your plan, it's 8,550 for individuals, and then an additional $1,000 for the catch-up. So that brings you to 9,550. So certainly some opportunities on the qualified savings plans. If you're max funding those and you still have the ability to save more, after-tax brokerage account is one of the most underrated vehicles for investments. We just did an episode on this. In my opinion, it has the most flexibility out of all of the accounts and the contribution phase, the distribution phase, and the legacy phase. So very, very powerful tool. So if you've checked off those boxes, or if it makes sense for you to get some money in an after-tax account, that could be a great opportunity to really juice that bucket up before you get to retirement. This is cup number 2 of the day. I've gotten very little sleep. We moved in Friday, so I'm recording this Monday. Yeah, so today's Monday. And Friday night, I think I went to bed at about 3 a.m. because I was just super excited to be in the new house. Like, it's been a little bit of a stressful year, because moving into a house that you're not going to be in long term, you don't really fully unpack and settle. And I did actually some YouTube videos over the last year from my dining room table at the rental house, and you could see I was sitting on a dining room table. So it was fine, but it really wasn't a serviceable home office. So that's why I rented an office downtown in Chattanooga. And that's worked great. I'm going to probably keep that office so I can kind of go back and forth between getting out of the house and doing things at home. But I feel like this is it just feels home to me here. But anyways, so super excited on Friday night, and I just couldn't contain myself. I had to stay up and soak it in. And I was unpacking boxes and getting my garage set up at 2 a.m. on Friday. So then Saturday night, very similar story. I stayed up until about 1:30. And then last night I went to bed a little earlier, about 11:30. But yeah, Saturday night was great. I smoked a little cigar in my driveway. It's like a peaceful, we're on a cul-de-sac. So it's like a peaceful setting. And Anyway, so I'm very excited to be in the new house, but all that to say, I am dog tired right now. And so I am living on caffeine. So here we go. All right. Number two, this is a tough one for some of you. This is going to be working longer. Okay. It's going to be tougher for some of you, a tougher pill to swallow because you may have had a goal to retire early. Maybe it was at 55 or at 60, but then doing so, let's say you retired at 55, you need to kind of plan for at least 30 years, probably longer, probably 40 years potentially. Okay. If you go 55 to 95, that's a long time. Okay. So not to say it's not doable. We have clients retire before 55. Okay. But it's a challenge, especially with how high inflation has been over the last few years. So don't beat yourself up if you're not on track for retiring at 55 or 58 or 59. But maybe you wanted to retire at 60 or 62. And you're like, hey, I could retire now, but now I'm going to retire before Medicare eligibility at 65. Maybe I can work 2 more years to get to Medicare eligibility and then fully retire. Just delaying retirement a little bit, it makes probably more of an impact than any of these other things that I put on the list here long term. It's just that working an extra 1, 2, or even 3 years. The extra savings, like I said, it depends on how many years you have to save. But working longer, so impactful. This doesn't have to be in your current job. I mean, like you could say, I can't continue where I'm at right now. Maybe you're a physician, or maybe you are working a very intense tech job. I don't know what or maybe it's blue collar, maybe it's physical activity. Like physically, you can't do what you're doing for much longer. Maybe you do retire from what you're doing now, but then transition to something else. And maybe it's even part-time. Okay. One or both spouses maybe are doing something part-time just to earn a little bit of extra income to kind of bridge the gap. That's called kind of the gap, the gap years between when you retire to when you start taking those guaranteed income sources like Social Security or potentially pension income. Okay. Those gap years can be a little bit stressful if you have no income coming in. If you're relying all on your portfolio, especially if you go through some times of volatility, that can be a little stressful. So if you earn a little extra income, whether it's full-time employment or part-time employment, it just makes such a dramatic impact long-term in the plan. So if this is an option for you, I think that's a great strategy. Okay. And I'm going to do an episode here at some point. Maybe it's next one or maybe it's 2 from now, talking about some cool side hustles that I've been reading about for retirees. There's this Reddit thread out there where they talk about the best side hustles for retirees. So I kind of liked that idea, that concept. I'm going to spin that off into a podcast episode. And we had Roberto Fortuna, our very own, talk about his experience in working in retirement as well. Even though he's the youngest retiree on the planet, he's been working with our firm and making such a big impact on our clients on the financial planning and the tax side. So super excited to have Roberto working in retirement. So thank you, Roberto. I know you listen to these. But yeah, delaying retirement, working a little bit longer, working part-time. I throw all those into one category and really delaying those portfolio withdrawals or reducing those portfolio withdrawals to allow you to maximize your Social Security benefits, allow you to continue to have that tax-deferred savings, that tax-free savings on your investment accounts makes a big, big impact. All right, number 3 I threw in here. This is really important, okay? Really reviewing your spending assumptions and potentially your long-term retirement budget, okay? And potentially cut spending. And notice how I said potentially cut spending because it's not a guarantee that you're going to need to cut spending. Okay. Because oftentimes what I see in some of the assumptions out there from a retirement budget perspective is folks that kind of put in all their expenses and all of the discretionary items in there. And they just say, this is what we need. And then they assume that for a 30-year time horizon adjusted for inflation. But you've heard us talk a little bit about this before, the spending stages in retirement. We'd like to break those down into 3 distinct phases: the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. Maybe in the go-go years, you're doing what you say you're going to do. And absolutely, maybe you need to even budget a little bit more than what you're currently spending for a period of time. Maybe it's 10 years. Maybe you're Superman, Superwoman health, and you're going to be go-go years until you're 75, 80. We have some of those in the families that we serve, with our clients that we serve. So absolutely, whatever that is, the go-go years are probably not going to last forever. So it probably doesn't make sense for you to assume that level of spending forever. Now, there is an argument out there that says, you know what? Well, healthcare costs in the beginning might be a little lower and discretionary expenses might be a little higher, but then over time, discretionary goes down and then healthcare costs go up at the end. Absolutely true. This is mainly related to long-term care costs. If you have long-term care costs at the end of retirement, that could throw a wrench into your plan. Okay. So sort of the go-go year, slow-go year, no-go year spending, sure, that could apply for discretionary expenses or things like travel or whatever it might be, or or gifting to charity, gifting to family members. But at some point later on, if you have an unexpected healthcare cost, you want to plan for that because you want to maintain your independence. You want to maintain your dignity. You don't want any of your family members you don't want to be reliant on any of your family members overall. That's what I hear over time and time again. Kevin, we don't want to be a burden on our loved ones. So that's the argument, in my opinion. Again, I don't sell insurance, but that's the argument for buying long-term care insurance because it kind of eliminates that potential risk. You don't have to worry about, hey, if I need long-term care, what's that going to do to my portfolio, my level of independence, or my spouse's level of independence long-term? That's a big thing too. It's like, hey, if spouse A needs care, well, spouse B may live another 5, 10, or 15 years, especially the male-female dynamic. Women live longer than men. So if the male needs care first, what's going to happen? Is the spouse going to come in and be the caretaker, or are they going to hire outside help? If they hire outside help, that's going to drain the portfolio dramatically unless you have long-term care insurance. Or the alternative is the spouse does the care, and then 2, 3, 4 years in, they're physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, and now they need care, or now their longevity has been shortened because of being a caregiver is taxing. So I think that's the argument for long-term care insurance. But overall, my plea is long-term, in terms of like what your spending is for your discretionary makes such a difference in terms of whether you're on track or not on track. And just making that small tweak to say, hey, go, your spending is this. That way we can have peace of mind. We're going to enjoy this. But at some point, we're going to want to slow it down. We're not going to be going to Europe 4 times a year when we're 80, you know what I mean? Or maybe 75 even. So maybe you do that in your 50s and 60s, and then you start to slow that down later on. I will say though, I have seen some exceptions on this one where instead of the big trips overseas, our clients that are in their late 70s or early 80s, they're actually doing like the family trips together where they're like, hey, we've got some adult children and they have kids. So we've got some grandkids and we want to do a trip for everybody and we want to pay for it all. We want to do a cruise and we want to do everyone together. Well, their retirement budget may be extended. So you need to really think through this and kind of your family dynamics and again, your personal goals. That's why personal finance, personal to everybody. Like Cody Garrett loves to say, my buddy Cody, keep finance personal. And I think that's so true because everyone's going to have a different opinion on what they're going to do in retirement and how much that's going to require from a financial resource perspective. But really review that. And another thing I'll throw in there too is there's been studies out there that evidence that has been shown that retirees actually lag inflation a little bit more than just a regular consumer, meaning like someone who's in their 30s or 40s, the CPI, the consumer price index, their expenses are going up in lockstep. Whereas when you're in retirement, studies have shown that you actually lag inflation by about 1% a year over time. Again, ignoring the long-term care event down the road, but that's a factor. So if you're saying inflation long-term is 2, okay, but your inflation experience is only 1 because maybe a lot of your expenses are fixed. Maybe your mortgage is paid off. Maybe you've got some property taxes, but maybe you're homesteaded. So therefore, you're not increasing as much as someone else whose property taxes are going up at the rate of inflation. So there's a lot of considerations there, but just kind of know that typically retirees long-term are lagging inflation by about 1% a year. So kind of think through, okay, the 4% rule, withdrawal strategy, long-term care concerns. I mean, all of this kind of plays into your spending assumptions and your withdrawal plan in retirement. And really make sure you review that, have something that you're confident with, but that you can also enjoy those go years. That's really my biggest thing when I'm working with a new client. I want to make sure we have the freedom, or not we, that you have the freedom to spend down your assets guilt-free in those go years. And this is one of the biggest challenges that I run into with individuals, new retirees. It's very hard to spend down their portfolio. They've been saving for 25, 30, 35 years. It's a little difficult from a psychological perspective, spending down that investment portfolio. So come up with a plan, implement the plan. All right, number 4, this is a big one. Review your long-term asset allocation. Okay. Now, this kind of goes in hand with what I talked about earlier with regards to risk in the market. Okay. Because if you're assuming a 9% rate of return, well, that means you're probably 100% in the stock market. Okay. That may not be very comfortable for a lot of you, especially as you approach retirement. You're getting close to retirement. Maybe you've read about sequence of withdrawals where if you retire in a bear market in the first 2 years, dramatically impacts the longevity of your portfolio. And you don't know if you're going to retire into a bear market. Like folks that retired, imagine retiring in 2007. I mean, imagine that. You had basically the worst market we've had since the Great Depression. You didn't know that. I mean, no one had a crystal ball. Certainly there was writing on the wall, but no one had a crystal ball to say the market's going to drop 50+% in a 12-month period. That was painful. Okay. So imagine if that happens in your first 1 or 2 years, and maybe not even that dramatic. Maybe it's like a 2022 bear market. That was painful too, because again, we had the stocks and bonds and cash all in a bear market. We had the triple bear. We haven't seen that in our lifetime. Okay. So the triple bear, you don't know what you're going to retire into. But I think the controllable, again, I go back to what we can control and what we can't control. One of the things that you can control is your long-term asset allocation. So to keep things really simple, the higher exposure you have into equities, the higher exposure you have into stocks, the higher long-term rate of return you should expect. Okay. And that's the key. Expect. It's not guaranteed. Okay. Like an annuity or some kind of fixed income instrument where it's just like, this is your long-term rate of return with this 30-year bond or this 10-year bond or this 20-year bond. Certainly there are risks to bonds. Okay. We've been reading a little bit about that in the news right now, but certainly there are risks to bonds, but not like stocks, okay, or equities. However, no risk, no reward. So the higher allocation you have into stocks, the long-term, the higher rate of return you should expect long-term. So again, this kind of goes hand in hand with what I mentioned earlier. One of the biggest mistakes I see retirees make is they get too conservative too early on in retirement. They get to 60 or 65 and they're like, okay, I'm done accumulating. Now I'm going to transition into the distribution phase. I was 70% of the stock market. I'm going to go down to 20% or 25%. That's a no-no, especially if you're a little bit borderline in terms of being funded or not well funded. Okay. Because the higher expected rate of return you have in your portfolio, the more of a probability you're going to achieve your long-term goals. But there is a fine line, because if you go 100% in stocks and you retire into a triple bear or some kind of recession or downturn, that's not a good place to be either, because all you have in your portfolio is stocks, maybe a little bit of cash, but ultimately you're going to have to sell something at the wrong time. You're going to have to sell stocks in a downturn. That's not what you want to do. So you've got to have some, in my opinion, some sort of alternative asset class in the portfolio. Now, what you're using there, that's an entirely different topic in all in of itself. But fixed income is the most popular one. Money market accounts, CDs, cash accounts, truthfully, annuities. All of those could be a potential fixed income or fixed income alternative that you probably want to have some kind of exposure to protect yourself in a downturn. And I go back to Bill Bengen's 4% rule. And what he found was the 4% rule, by the way, if you don't know this, the assumed asset allocation to come up with that 4% rate of withdrawal, that safe max rate of withdrawal, was 50% equities, basically all in the S&P 500, and then 50% in government bonds, U.S. treasuries. I think he used the 10-year treasury. I don't think it was the third. I think it was the 10-year treasury. So 50% stocks, 50% bonds. That was his suggestion on the minimum equity exposure in a portfolio. But he sort of liked leaning to upwards of 75% in equities, which that's kind of where I am too, is like a little bit more than 50. Over 75, we definitely have clients that are over 75% in equities, but it's because they have the capacity to do so. Maybe they have a pension. Maybe they have, their expenses are low enough where their Social Security and a very safe rate of withdrawal achieves their desired lifestyle, and they don't need to spend more or want to spend more. So therefore, they could be more aggressive. They have the capacity to take on more risk. In this case, if you're a little bit behind for retirement or kind of borderline, you don't have the capacity to get ultra conservative. Okay. And this might be counterintuitive. You might think, hey, well, I need to protect and preserve what I have. Well, if you go too conservative, you bring other risks into play: interest rate risk, inflation risk, longevity risk. All of that comes into the equation more with a conservative portfolio versus a more aggressive portfolio. So coming up with some sweet spot, let's kind of use that rule of thumb, 50% to 75% in equities. So the more you dial up on the equity side, the higher expected rate of returns you should expect long-term, and that could improve your long-term outcome. But again, you have to have the tolerance to do so. Some people, even with a 75% equity portfolio in retirement, that may be a little uneasy. Okay. Now, if you're working with a good experienced planner, they should be able to coach you through what the proper withdrawal strategy is if you go through a downturn and you have 75% of your portfolio in equities. That's not concerning to me at all. I think 75% is absolutely appropriate. The tried and true portfolio that you probably have heard a lot of is the 60-40, 60% equities, 40% fixed income. That's appropriate too. There's no right or wrong answer in terms of what the investment mix is. But if you sort of parlay that with some kind of bucketing strategy where you say, you know what, okay, maybe we want to be 75% equities, 25% fixed income, but I have a Roth account and I have a tax deferred account and I have a brokerage account. And my game plan is to probably tackle the brokerage account first, or my non-retirement assets first, grow that tax deferred account maybe until you hit RMD age, require minimum distribution age, and then tap into my tax-free last. Well, thinking about asset location strategy and what that involves is taking more risk with the long-term bucket, the Roth account, taking adequate risk with the tax deferred account, because that's also a little bit longer term, and taking on the least amount of risk with your taxable account. That could still support a 75% equity exposure, but you have a lot of those equities in your longer term buckets, in your long-term tax deferred accounts or your long-term tax-free accounts or HSAs. And therefore that could give you a little bit more peace of mind knowing that the bucket you're relying on in the beginning of retirement is a little bit more defensive, a little bit more conservative. So think about the asset location as kind of like a little parlay to this whole thing as well. You need to factor in taxes too, okay? Because one of the things that we see a lot of is if you do go through that bucketing strategy and you have your taxable account more conservative, this could create a little bit of a tax trap. Maybe you keep $100,000 in there and it's earning 5% interest. Fine, may seem okay on surface, but that extra $5,000 of income is added to your modified adjusted gross income. And it could kind of bite you a little bit on the back end for some of these other calculations with regards to how much of your Social Security is taxable, what tax bracket you're in, what your capital gains bracket is, if you're subject to IRMA penalties, income-related monthly adjustment amounts. So there's a lot of factors to consider, but having a taxable bucket that's overly conservative and too much interest income, not ideal in my book. All right, number 5. Let's go through this one here. Oh, this is good. Thinking about relocating, which is what we did last July, moving from Florida to Tennessee. This could be in the cards too to help improve your probability of success. And I ran into this all the time being in Florida. I'm actually running into this a little bit more in Tennessee as well. Being in Chattanooga, I don't want to market it too much, but it's becoming a very desirable place to retire. Okay, I think it was rated somewhere. I think it was like Southern Magazine, top place to retire in the Southeast, Chattanooga, Tennessee. So just saying, you had all the other Florida cities that were underneath it. Chattanooga was number 1. So I'm seeing a little bit of that here in Chattanooga. I had a client move from California, or they're building a house moving from California. We have clients that are sort of the halfbacks that retired down to Florida, but they're like, this isn't for me. I'm going to move somewhere in the mountains. Oftentimes they choose somewhere in the Carolinas, whether it's Asheville or Sapphire, North Carolina, or Boone, North Carolina. But then they kind of look at Tennessee as an option as well because of the no state income taxes. You do have to be careful because sales taxes are a lot higher here than some of those other states that I mentioned. So it's not like it's a no-brainer just to move to a state income tax-free state, because they're always going to get you. They're going to find a way to tax it, whether it's property taxes, sales taxes, ancillary tax, whatever it might be, homeowners insurance. There's always other costs that you're not really going to kind of think through on paper on the outset. But however, I have seen this successfully implemented time and time again, especially when I was practicing in Florida. We still work with a ton of Florida retirees. We love our Florida retirees. A lot of them move from the New York area, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, but really all over the DC area as well, which is where I'm from. But moving to a lower cost of living area in Florida. So let's say you're selling your house. Let's say you're in New York and you've got a $1.2 million property that's paid off. And you're like, hey, right now, like $1.2 million, it may sound like a lot, but you're basically in like a 1-story home that's maybe 2,000 square feet because you're in New York. So you're like, hey, I can get a nicer house, a newer house in Florida or somewhere else. So you sell your house, you take that 1.2 million of equity. Okay, now you have equity in your hand. You may have a little tax due there because you probably bought that house for like $200,000. So your gain is like $1 million. And you can exclude up to $500,000 if you're married, or $250,000 for single. But you may have a little bit of a capital gain tax bill. But now you have this equity, this net equity that you can kind of turn around, and you could spend it all. I mean, you could easily build a house in Florida for $1 million easily. Okay, I mean, that's the thing. The cost of living, when we first moved to St. Augustine, Jacksonville, this was 2015, I would consider that to be a very affordable area. I mean, we bought our first house in 2016 for $312,000. And that's in a very desirable neighborhood. You cannot find houses for under $600,000 in that particular neighborhood these days. And that's a starter home is what I'm talking about. A lot of these houses that are being built in that neighborhood, in that zip code, $1 million, $1.5, $2 million very, very easily. So I wouldn't say it's as affordable as it was when we first moved down there, but either way, it could be less expensive relative to where you're moving from. So you take that $1 million of net equity, you could spend it all on a new build or an existing home, or you can buy something for a little bit less. And you say, hey, you know what? I only need $700,000. I say only, but you only need $700,000 to buy this new house. Now you have a $300,000 net profit that you can just bank and be smart with this. Don't just sit in cash because again, that's not going to keep pace with inflation. That's going to drag you down from an interest income perspective and a tax perspective. But put that money to work. And now you've got this taxable bucket that's going to be growing as part of your retirement plan as well. So that cost of living arbitrage is definitely something to consider, something to take advantage of. The locals may not like it a lot because you're taking your money from a more expensive cost of living area and you're buying into some of the more desirable, more expensive areas in that particular zip code. So just kind of know that, the locals may not be happy about this, me talking about it, but that is an opportunity and it's been happening for decades. Folks on the West Coast, a lot of it's Texas, Arizona, Nevada. If you're on the East Coast, I mentioned Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina. I mean, they're very retiree friendly states and it's certainly something to really look at. And I will say though, a lot of folks kind of look at relocating in retirement and they think through the financial aspect. You also need to think through the kind of the quality of life aspect too. Like, where are your adult children? Where are your grandkids? Where's your circle of friends? And now certainly you can make new friends. I'm not saying but you may have some friends that you've known for a long period of time. Like if you're like me, I have a friend that I've known since I was 3 years old. Like we're still pretty tight. A lot of my friends I've known since middle school, elementary school, high school, college. These days as an adult, I don't make a lot of new friends. I'm like in it with the kids. Like we're friends with our kids, like parents, you know what I mean? Like our classmates' parents, and they're cool. Actually, a lot of them are great. Loving our school, like the parents of the kids at our school, my boys' school, I should say. But you may have friends that you've known for 25, 30, 40 years plus, and it might be a little difficult to relocate and leave them. But now you can't just stay somewhere or you can't move somewhere just because of someone or some group of people, because they're also not set in stone either. They may be relocating. They may be planning to relocate in retirement too, but it's a factor. Okay. Hospitals, that's another factor too. Like maybe you have some doctors, maybe you need some special care and the doctors that you have are really in that kind of the area that you're in versus where you may want to relocate to. So really take that into consideration. That is something that has put a lot of stress in the area we just moved from, the St. Augustine, Jacksonville area. It's been a very desirable destination for retirees to move to. Therefore, the cost of living has gone up and the infrastructure is not there. The roads, the schools, the hospitals, everyone is at capacity there. So it's put a little stress on the system. So just keep that in mind before you actually relocate. And I've talked about this before. Try it out. If you're really strongly considering it, before you sell your property and buy a house sight unseen, try to rent for 6 months or a year. Now, having just gone through that, I will tell you, it's a lot more stressful to do that. What I might have done differently, truthfully, moved the majority of our stuff into a storage unit and get a place that's already furnished. And we can just not have to worry about unboxing or unpacking a lot of things. And then once we get the long-term house, then we just move that stuff from the storage area into the new home. Maybe, I don't know. It still would have been stressful either way. But anyways, we're past that. But anyways, thinking about downsizing, relocating, using that potential home equity from the sale of your home and also potentially lower cost of living. Maybe it's lower taxes. Maybe it's lower property values. Maybe it's lower cost of living in general. Maybe just groceries, gas, less expensive in the area you might move to. All of that could help improve your potential outcome in retirement. All right. Then the sixth thing I put in here is don't be afraid. This is kind of on the similar topic, but don't be afraid to use your home equity in retirement. Okay. So I see this all the time where folks, their largest asset or one of the largest assets is their home. It's a paid off house and maybe it's worth $750 or $1 million or $2 million. And they've got this unpaid, this home free and clear. They don't want to sell it, because they like it. This is their home. They've been in for a long time. This is where they want to age. They want to age in place there. And that's great. But oftentimes what I find is when they pass, that asset is just added on top of their financial legacy to their heirs, which is certainly not a bad thing. If your kids are going to inherit your 401k and that $2 million house, okay, great for them. But if that impacted your standard of living just to leave them a large property that's paid off at your death, maybe you've missed out on experiences. Maybe you missed out on opportunities to gift to your children during lifetime, gift to your grandkids, gift to charity, travel the world, whatever it might be, standard of living with regards to healthcare. That home value is oftentimes underutilized, in my opinion. So one of the ways to tap into your home equity in retirement without having to sell it is via the HECM mortgage. Okay. So the HECM mortgage, reverse mortgage, I should say, that comes available once you turn 62. And now you have access. You can tap in to that home equity, whether it's an emergency fund, cash line of credit, essentially kind of like a HELOC, or even income payments for the rest of your life. It will reduce the amount of equity you leave behind, okay? But you can age in place, you can stay in the house, you're not gonna have to pay back that loan. And ultimately, that loan would again be subtracted with some fees, I'm sure, as well, from the final sale once the property is sold at your death. So thinking about home equity as part of your retirement plan, this could also be a great place to tackle long-term care as well. Just from my perspective, like maybe you can't buy insurance, maybe you have pre-existing healthcare condition. I see this all the time. Because the sweet spot to buy long-term care insurance is between 55 and 60 or 65. Well, you may have a pre-existing condition that impacts your ability to buy that insurance. So therefore you have to self-fund. And if you're self-funding, maybe you're parking assets that you want to use for spending, but now you've got to allocate those for long-term care that could impact your quality of life while you're living. So instead, look at your home equity, look at a potential reverse mortgage as that long-term care source. And again, because it's not a guarantee you're going to need care. And if you need care, for how long? The average, they say, is around 2 years in terms of needing care, but it's either, it could be a month, it could be 5 years. You have no idea. I have no idea. No one has a crystal ball. You can certainly look at family history and kind of your own health profile to give yourself a best guess. But the insurance companies will also know that too. So if you've got some health history on your records and you buy insurance, they're going to either rate you or decline you. So if you've got that already ready, you might just need to self-fund. And again, using that home equity as a self-funding source could kind of free up your ability to spend down your own assets, your own retirement assets on your lifestyle versus kind of thinking, hey, this is also a long-term care fund as well. If you can buy insurance, this also kind of supports what we talked about earlier, is that kind of frees up, that gives you permission to spend your retirement assets and also gives you permission to spend money on care if and when that particular individual needs long-term care down the road. So lots of things to consider there, but hopefully that was helpful. Now, so a few tactical things I want to point out, okay, is number one, if you are feeling a little bit underfunded, if you're feeling a little bit behind, maximizing your Social Security benefit could do wonders for you. Delaying that until 70, which is the latest retirement age, delaying it maybe at least until full retirement age. All of that's going to give you sort of a higher baseline that's also going to adjust with inflation long term to kind of provide that income floor in retirement. Along those same lines, looking at life annuities too, because if you're a little bit borderline and you feel like, hey, if we go through a downturn in the markets and I'm aggressively spending down, that could impact the longevity of my portfolio, where life annuity, that will continue on for as long as you live. So you don't have to worry about that particular asset or income source going away, because hopefully, just like Social Security, it's going to continue to pay throughout your lifetime. Number three, I'll point out real quick, is on Roth conversions. They may not be right for you. If you're feeling a little bit behind for retirement, and if you are behind, the numbers don't lie. If you are behind for retirement, you may not be a great candidate to do a bunch of Roth conversions, because you have to front load a lot in taxes early on. And it's just going to impact the break even long term, especially with an underfunded plan, because your rate of withdrawal is probably going to be a little bit higher than average in the beginning during those gap years, until you start Social Security or until you start your pension or start that annuity income. Not saying don't do Roth conversions, but it may not be as much of a needle mover for you if you're a little bit behind for retirement. You can't convert your way to a successful retirement, is what I'm saying. With that being said, tax efficient withdrawal planning will matter, in terms of which bucket are you tackling first? Are you going to tap into the taxable bucket, then the tax deferred, then tax free? That's kind of your traditional method of thinking. Or are you going to go maybe a combination of taxable and tax deferred to max out certain tax brackets and then save the tax free? Or are you going to go, hey, tax deferred, I'm going to leave for a legacy, for charity, or for my kids because they're in a lower tax bracket. I'm going to spend down the tax free. I'm going to spend down my taxable. There are so many different scenarios you can run with that one, but tax efficient withdrawal planning will absolutely matter for anyone, whether you're well-funded or not well-funded. And then I'd say the last thing is just making sure you stress test the plan for all of the potential concerns that you might have. Using that baseline Monte Carlo, and it's tough. There's no guideline to say, hey, this is what your Monte Carlo needs to be. I was talking about the Monte Carlo earlier, 500 to 1,000 different hypotheticals, and it spits out a percentage, a probability of success, okay? And there's no definition to say, hey, if you're in this range, you're going to be successful versus this range, you're not going to be successful. It's not like that, because it's directly related to other things that are important to you. Like if you want to maximize your financial legacy to your kids, you probably want a higher percent probability of success, because you don't want a scenario where you're spending too much relative to your portfolio performance And therefore, that's impacting the legacy amount to your kids. On the flip side, if you don't want to leave a massive legacy to your heirs, and you want to die with zero, you can get away with a much lower probability of success. So there's no right or wrong answer on this one, but stress testing it using the Monte Carlo, hypothetical bear markets at the beginning of retirement, hypothetical inflation rates long term, because who knows, is inflation going to get down to the long run average of 2? Who knows? I don't know the impact of tariffs. I mean, I don't even know what tariffs are in place at this point in time. What's being paused, what's being put in place. There's so many moving pieces on this one. It seems like that tariff news is changing daily, but we'll see how that plays out. But it could provide a little bit short-term inflation, impact on inflation. So if inflation doesn't get to 2, what is it? What's 2.5% or 3%? Again, that impacts long-term what your probability of success is going to be. And I would say small tweaks over time and being flexible and fluid in your plan is also super key, because just because you set out with a plan, we're talking a potentially 20, 25 or 30-year time horizon. You can always make adjustments on the fly. One of my favorite adjustments is using guardrails, where you start with a certain rate of withdrawal, but if the market shifts your portfolio downwards, we go through a down market, and then your rate of withdrawal jumps up above a certain threshold, maybe you pare back your spending for a period of time. On the flip side, let's say the markets are performing better than expected. Maybe you give yourself an additional raise over and above inflation. So guardrails is a great way to be flexible, to be fluid, and then reviewing that spending budget, that retirement spending budget. Because oftentimes what I found is folks that are before retirement, you don't know what you don't know yet. And I don't know what you don't know. I don't know what I don't know yet. So ultimately, once you get to retirement and you're experiencing your lifestyle, you're going to kind of get a better feel for what your spending is. So I think, yeah, it's great to have the budget pre-planned beforehand, but then once you get into retirement, review that. Compare that to what your initial budget was, your initial projections were, and ultimately that could help set the course for the long-range projections. But being flexible in that spending is going to be key for you. And listen, if you're kind of like, hey, I don't even know if I'm on track, I don't want to spend the time to figure all this out, this all sounds great, and you're like, hey, I'd love to kind of pick your brain, Kevin, and your team in terms of how I'm tracking for retirement, we'd love to help you. You can start with the retirement readiness questionnaire that's linked in the show notes on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it might be. You can click the link. If that link doesn't work, I don't know. I've seen some issues, especially on Apple, where the link doesn't really map over from Spotify. We post all of our episodes on Spotify and on YouTube, but then it's supposed to matriculate into the other ecosystem of podcasts. And I've noticed the links sometimes don't work on some of those other ones. So again, the RRQ questionnaire is also just directly on my website. You can just go to my website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, and you can click in the beginning where it just says start now. And it'll kind of give you a little insight in terms of the process, what we do up front, what we do during the process, what we do after our process, and a little about the types of folks that we serve and that we work with. But if you are finding value, if you found value in today's episode, first of all, I appreciate you. Make sure to like the video. Make sure to leave us that 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, whatever it might be. Leave us that review. It helps us impact more people. It helps kind of tell the algorithm, hey, this is some valuable content. We want to share this with more people. That is a big thank you. I would say thank you for doing that if you have left a 5-star review already. But if you haven't done so and you're liking the content, make sure you do that. And then my second ask is just make sure you share this podcast with someone else that's in the PFR Nation sweet spot. Someone who's over 50, who's already exceeded 7 figures of investment portfolio. And they're like, hey, now I want to get to this position. I want to fire my boss. I want to quit work. I want to quit my day job. That's the type of individuals that are going to find value in the content we put out. So I appreciate y'all. I appreciate everyone for being patient this week. Like I said, I don't think this episode's coming out on Tuesday, so you're probably listening to this on Wednesday or Thursday this week. But I'll see y'all next week. I'm excited. Hopefully the office will continue to kind of shape out here. Hopefully I actually have a desk. I can't guarantee that by next week, but right now, these cardboard boxes, not really ideal, but it's working for now. Hopefully you guys found value in the episode today. And until next week, I'll see you then.